Welcome to Solo, the single person's guide to a remarkable life. Your host, a behavioral scientist and bachelor, talks to leading experts and successful singles about living solo and living well. Travel more, make things, sleep in when you want to. Here's the playbook for the person who is unapologetically unattached. Now, please welcome Dr. Peter McGraw.
The choice of the word quirky, why? And can you tease us with some of the alternatives that you considered?
Well, I think in the book QuirkyAlone, I have a bunch of alternatives like eccentric alone or bizarre alone, freaky alone. Obviously, none of them.
Freaky alone. Hold on. Freaky Alone is a whole different book, and it's in a different section of the library. Okay, good. Welcome back. We continue our series on solitude with a conversation with Sasha Cagen, the founder of the QuirkyAlone movement. A QuirkyAlone is someone who enjoys being single, but is not opposed to being in a relationship, and generally prefers to be alone rather than dating for the sake of being in a couple. Does that sound like you? In any case, we discuss the origins of the term, its evolution, and how the media landscape represents singles. If you stick around to the end, you'll learn about one of Sasha's favorite QuirkyAlones. I'll give you a hint. You will know her by her first name. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Let's get started. Welcome to Solo, the single person's guide to a remarkable life. I'm Peter McGraw. Today's guest is Sasha Cagen. Sasha is the founder of the QuirkyAlone movement, giving new meaning to the word quirky, spreading a message of self-acceptance for single and partner people who want to live life on their own terms. She's the author of the cult hit QuirkyAlone, a manifesto for uncompromising romantics. She's also the author of To-Do List, From Buying Milk to Finding a Soulmate, What Our Lists Reveal About Us. I do love a good list. Sasha is currently at work on her next book, Wet. Welcome, Sasha.
Thanks, Peter. Good to hear you.
Yes, I'm very excited about this. I loved your book. I love the term QuirkyAlone. And maybe we should probably start by defining what QuirkyAlone means. And then I think we should dive a little bit into how did you become a QuirkyAlone? How did you discover QuirkyAlone? How has QuirkyAlone evolved? But let's start with the definition, I think.
Okay. So the basic definition of a QuirkyAlone is a person who has the capacity to be comfortable being single. And most QuirkyAlones want to be in a relationship, but they don't want to settle. And so a QuirkyAlone person develops more comfort and capacity to be single than the average person. But usually they're romantics and they're holding out for that person. So, you know, it's a state of being that includes many different emotional moments, let's say, of contentment being single and also yearning and, you know, the whole spectrum of what it means to be a QuirkyAlone human, let's say.
Well, I like this because I talk about solos as being single either for now or forever. And so QuirkyAlones are in the for now category.
They're for now, but personally, because I have a deep connection to QuirkyAlone because I came up with the word, I consider being QuirkyAlone something that is independent of being single or in a relationship. So in the deepest level, I think, you know, even if you're married, you can still be a QuirkyAlone.
That's fair.
Because it's a philosophy.
Yeah. Those people don't listen to this podcast as much, though. That's all. So I like this idea. You know what I really like about the idea, and this is something I've been writing about and thinking about a lot lately, is this idea that we have this narrative, which is you are single, and until you couple up, you're somehow less than. And as a result, you spend a lot of time kind of waiting and hoping and putting off as a result. And I think that that's a great loss. I think that's tragic, to be honest, given that we live short lives. And so what I love about QuirkyAlone is that notion of contentment. Like I'm happy the way my life is. I would also welcome this other state of the world and transition into it while also remaining comfortable with myself and alone time and so on.
Absolutely. And since I wrote that book, I became a life coach, and I work with people mainly who identify with Quirky Alone. And I hear that a lot from clients. The decision to buy a home is a big one where, it can feel scary. A lot of decisions get put off if one is single, because it feels like, well, I shouldn't make that move because it's going to prevent me from finding a partner. Especially for women, I think there's this sort of feeling that I should be adaptable and open and, sort of follow a man. I can say for me, that came up in a big way when, well, we'll talk about this later, but the subject of the book I'm working on now is a memoir and a period of my life when I went off traveling by myself in South America. And I went through a lot of fear then that if I made that choice, that would mean that I was going to be alone forever. And I bring that up to say, Quirky Alone is this ideal to be comfortable being single and enjoy your life. And I think you're absolutely right that it's tragic that we have so much internal negative self-talk about being single that stops us, and that we feel like we can't go and live our lives and do what we want, So I think Quirky Alone is a really good tool for remembering that you can be whole as a single person. And I'm just sharing my own personal struggle and the struggles of my clients to say, yeah, even Quirky Alone struggle with that, but yeah, you can do it. Go, I totally agree. Go live your life.
Indeed. Yes. I want to talk to you about the evolution and how you have evolved and how your thoughts on Quirky Alone have evolved. And I'm really excited to hear about Wet. But let's talk about the origin first before the evolution. So Quirky Alone's been around for a while. How did it happen? How did it became a phenomenon?
Yeah, it became a phenomenon before so many things became phenomena, because now it's like every day it's a new dating word as a phenomena, like situationship or, aromantic, asexual. All of this sort of terminology is big now. But Quirky Alone came into being in 1999, 2000. Okay. So it was a forerunner of our new vocabulary about being single, dating, and relationship. And I was in my mid-20s at the time, and it really came from my own exploration of life, observing my friends, observing pop culture. I had been a person who mainly had been single, like the Quirky Alone prototype definition. I was the kind of person who in high school wanted to have a boyfriend, but there just wasn't anyone at my high school who fit the bill. And that pattern kind of continued into young adulthood, where I did date, but most of the time I was single. And then there was this sort of origin story New Year's Eve party in Brooklyn when I was 25, where I went with my friends. At that time in life, it was still obligatory to go to a New Year's Eve party.
Sure, of course, yeah.
And it was that moment of looking around the room at midnight for someone to kiss, because, that was something that I wanted. And I was disappointed and didn't find one, but I noticed that nobody else was kissing either. So it was sort of this moment of an epiphany of, wow, I'm not the only one. Okay. And then the next morning I went to brunch with friends. And that was the moment when somehow I just decided these two words came together for me and were QuirkyAlones. And I had also been obsessed with the show Ally McBeal and had been playing. That was a very quirky show, and there was a lot of scenes of her walking alone. So those words had been in a document on my job where I had been playing with them. So after that, I spent a year writing a 700-word essay to nail a definition. So that's how obsessive and perfectionistic I am, because I really wanted people to understand Quirky Alone. I didn't want misunderstanding. So I labored at this very short piece to make it very clear. And actually, a friend of mine who was younger than me at college received a draft, and she started circulating it. This was even before it was published. And so I had people at Vassar College sending me mixtapes and for QuirkyAlones. So, but basically then the next step was I had my own magazine that I published. I published it there. Utney Reader got a copy of it. They reprinted it. And then it just went wild because people really identified with it, because the word itself, Quirky Alone, felt so validating to people.
And it's a single word.
The single word?
It's a single word. Quirky Alone is one word.
It is a single word. It is one word. It has a different meaning when the words come together. So it's not about being alone. It's not just about being quirky. It's about this specific meaning when you put these two words
it's like
together.
a Venn diagram. Yes.
Yeah, and it's about basically it's about not settling at the end of the day, not settling in life and not settling in love. And so many people walk around feeling so much shame. And as you said when we started, feeling lesser because their lives haven't followed the course or the map of how it's supposed to go in adulthood. So, I think QuirkyAlone was just this balm for people, especially at that time, because there wasn't as much recognition of single people in culture. So it just felt tremendously validating to people. And I heard from so many of them, and that led to the book because, agents were reaching out to me, and basically there was just a snowball of interest.
I want to ask one more question about the definition. Obviously, I'm impressed that you spent a year getting this right. I think that's really wonderful. The choice of the word quirky, why? And can you tease us with some of the alternatives that you considered?
Well, I think in the book QuirkyAlone, I have a bunch of alternatives like eccentric alone or bizarre alone, freaky alone. Obviously, none of them.
QuirkyAlone. Hold on. QuirkyAlone is a whole different book, and it's in a different section of the library. Or not? It's not in the library. First of all, it's
there's a lot of freaky alone people. God bless them.
Okay, good.
But no, quirky. Why quirky is because it was very much. Quirky is softer, I think, for one. It's eccentric, but with a human touch that makes you feel like you can get warm and cuddly with a quirky person in a way that maybe you don't feel you can with QuirkyAlone. But also it was that sense that I had, as a young person, and really has kind of remained the same as I get older, that I only connect with a certain amount of people. Yes. I'm just not a generic person, and QuirkyAlones are not cookie cutter types. So it's kind of a practical recognition that for a quirky person, it may take a little longer to find someone who matches you. Not that they have to have all the same quirks. Everybody is completely individual. And all of my work kind of has this honoring of our quirkiness because, when I work with clients, for example, I'm very interested in finding out who they are, how they tick, because everybody's different, so that is kind of my orientation to the world. And the quirky part is the way of honoring that. Like, I love that about us as people. I love getting to know people's quirks. And, I think that the alone, I think it's really important to clarify the alone. Okay. That alone is not about being single or about being on a desert island by yourself. The alone was more like, I'm taking a stance of independence. I'm willing to go to this wedding alone, even though it's uncomfortable to go without a date, because I would rather...
I've done it.
Confront the world alone, have fun, dance, rather than be with someone that I don't really want to be with.
Yeah, that's great. And I, this is part of a series I'm doing on solitude. And so I think the idea that I have been investigating is there are vast benefits of solitude. And a lot of it has to do, if you want to be able to enjoy those benefits, you have to embrace solitude. That is, you have to be comfortable with it, right? And so otherwise it can become loneliness. And so I like this idea of alone, and it may be alone in a crowd, and in that sense, it may be uncoupled, it may be a time of solitude, and so I like this really quite a lot. It's interesting because I'm not a QuirkyAlone, even though I share some of the same values and beliefs. And the issue is this: I'm not a hopeless romantic. And so I don't, I'm adjacent to your crowd in some way, but I think many of my listeners probably fit it quite nicely. So they may be coming to you for some coaching, perhaps. But I do think it's interesting, this idea of like the ideal partner for a QuirkyAlone is someone. It can't be someone, I think, who wants to ride what I would call the traditional relationship escalator. That's going to become a challenge because the QuirkyAlone might say, hey, I want to do a vacation on my own, right? Or, this particular wedding would be a lot more fun if I went with my friend who's also friends with the bride and groom. And so you just stay home, hon. You know what I mean? Like that kind of thing. And so to have someone who's sort of understanding and accepting, gets it, so to speak.
Right. Absolutely. Nice. It's sort of like how I explained alone being this sort of stance of independence, that I'm willing to do things on my own. It's kind of the same in being quirky together. which is being quirky alone in a relationship that, as you said, people who are quirky alone may still want to travel on their own.
Yes.
They might want to sleep on their own. This is a big thing, just to sleep well.
I do like my alone sleeping in a nice cold chilly room with a heavy blanket.
Yeah. And it's kind of like when I say quirky alones want to be in a relationship, sometimes I think that people like you who are like on the spectrum of not wanting a relationship somehow may hear that as very traditional. But there's still this part for most quirky alones where they don't want to merge entirely. Like
I see. Then maybe I fit.
Well,
I'm not anti-relationship. I have girlfriends and I date and have a vast array of relationships. I just don't want to be married with kids, and I'm not eager to have
you
someone
can
move
still
in.
be quirky alone. I don't know. Maybe by the end of the podcast, we can decide if you're quirky alone or not.
I'm not the hopeless romantic, though, I would say. That's the or hopeful romantic.
I think those are words we'd have to pull apart too to see like what are we even talking about there? Because probably as you get older, you get like a little bit less dewy-eyed about all these things.
Well, in part because I don't think it solves as many problems as people often think that it does. Is my sense. So another 700-word essay, another year of writing, and we'll get that bit cracked.
That clarity.
A question before my next question, which is, how many times do you think you've said quirky alone in your life?
Oh, my God. That's a really good question. Maybe 100,000.
I bet you it's more.
It could be 500,000.
I'm just thinking how many times we've said it since this started as a possibility. And then not a critique. So I want to get back to this idea of pop culture. So we're close in age. You are younger and sprier, of course, but I do remember that time period, the late 90s, early aughts. It seems like there was a lot kind of happening in pop culture around singleness. I'll throw out a few. There's a movie that I liked quite a lot, and this is in the early 90s, called Singles. Great soundtrack. Has a Paul Westerberg song called Waiting for Somebody, which really captures that pain, that idea of wanting that kiss, wanting that person. And there's a line in there about going to bed alone that really kind of resonated at that time for me as a young man. Obviously, Sex and the City, which was happening. There's a movie that came up in a previous podcast episode on Solo called Love Jones, which was about it was in the late 90s about a bunch of black singles that sort of was a precursor to a lot of the stuff that we're seeing today. And you mentioned Ally McBeal. I'm wondering, are there any others that, whether it be music, movie, television, that stand out to you around that time that either informed your thinking or you just remember?
Well, of course, we had Seinfeld and Friends, which were
right.
Huge, obviously iconic shows based on single people.
Yeah, and Seinfeld in particular, I think, was not one that romanticized, partnerships and so on. Right? These were very single people.
Yeah, very quirky.
Very quirky, very single, and they didn't wrap the show with anybody getting together. No.
Friends was more conventional for sure. But it's interesting that you say that there was a lot going on with being single then, because I kind of look at that time as a limited number of shows that portrayed single life. And now that we have so many more, like it just seems like everything is more greenlit now. It just seems like we have a vast tolerance to see single life portrayed in movies and television shows, podcasts, everything, in a way that then I was really searching for those few role models that I could identify with.
Yeah, maybe it's just that these are the ones that stand the test of time, and they were the kind of, they were the first through the wall, so to speak, and kind of got this going.
They were big because of that. Like Seinfeld felt like a breakthrough because they were so different, it wasn't so many sitcoms are family sitcoms.
Yes, that's exactly right. And this comes up time and time again about how, I think even today, less so in the media, but even today, how churches, government, businesses kind of overlook and undervalue singles because they're still seen through that lens of being in a liminal space, that they're temporarily single.
Yeah. And I just wrote a newsletter that I sent out to my people about being single in the pandemic. And I think that we're living a moment right now where single people have been overlooked.
Totally.
Especially in this country where people are, nobody was willing to talk about sex except for in the New York City Health Department, where they issued very bizarre guidelines about how to have sex with coronavirus. But none of the guidelines were set up to acknowledge the reality that a lot of people do live alone and live in households of one. So where does that leave us?
That's right. I think Europe was a little better about that. There were talks about like having a kind of sex COVID buddy, so to speak. I got some pushback from a previous guest, but San Francisco made it illegal to have sex with with someone else who wasn't a member of your family. Like you were not allowed to meet with someone.
No Tinder dates.
You could not go out on a date, you know what I mean, with someone who wasn't, it wasn't stated that way, but that was what happened. It was like, you're not allowed to be interacting with someone who's not part of your family unit. So if you lived alone, that meant you were supposed to be alone. You could not. And then by extension, you couldn't date people. You couldn't have sex with people. You can't, you know what I mean? These kinds of things, which is, its effect is to discriminate against single people
it's
based
to
upon
erase
their
the whole
relationship
experience.
status.
It's like, we don't even exist. You're not thinking about us.
That's right. Yeah. So hence why we're here, and hence why QuirkyAlone took off, and it continues to be something in your life. How has it changed? How has it evolved since that original essay, the book, the media storm, and so on, since then?
Well, in many ways, it's still the same that, QuirkyAlone continues to attract people all the time. And, if you are really a QuirkyAlone, sometimes you don't even have to hear the definition. Like you already know what the definition is. So people are continually drawn to it. They come to the QuirkyAlone website and take the quiz, people in other parts of the world wake up to it, in Asia and India. It's, I have a lot of people signing up there. So I would say in a lot of ways, it's still sort of the same. I do think that so many different kind of alternative relationship structures have come to the fore since QuirkyAlone was written. So, being poly, being a solo poly, which, poly people who don't want a relationship. All these kind of alternative arrangements have become normalized, and so has Tinder. And a lot of people have found ways to meet their needs without getting in a relationship. It's much easier to have sex, for example. I think it's more socially acceptable to be single. So in some way, like QuirkyAlone, even though it seems to be a celebration of singlehood, it's also, in the deepest core, an argument for depth in relationship. And
interesting.
Relationships take work. All kinds of relationships take work. Friendships, obviously romantic relationships, even, this relationship that's happening right now, it's just a podcast, but everything takes work. So
damn right. We already had a failed attempt at this thing behind the scenes. So I feel like we really know each other now. We've been through defeat.
Right. And so sometimes I feel like I want QuirkyAlone to be more of an argument for like really good, healthy, deep relationships. And if there's some way that I've changed in my relationship to QuirkyAlone and relationships in general, it's that now that I'm older and I have a lot more understanding of myself and how relationships work, I think that when I was in my 20s, I really thought it was a matter of meeting the right person, and that would be the most important thing, and everything would fall into place. And now that I've lived so much and I've dated so many people, I can see that's not really, of course it's good. You need to find someone where you're compatible and there's attraction and all of that, can't settle as a QuirkyAlone, but it's still work. Like even if I find someone who's a good match, it's still work. It's hard to be in a relationship with myself. I'm also known as a self-marriage expert and advocate, and I help people marry themselves, and I do that myself. And that's also a nod to like, I have to work on my relationship to myself, to talk to myself more nicely. And so, everything that goes along with that, I think with my personal advocacy of QuirkyAlone, I want it to be also there's a sort of societal drift right now where a lot of people sort of think, oh, it's just easier to not be in a relationship. This is like, it's a lot of work. I'd rather just check out what's going out there on an app and, sleep with people. And that's fine if that's what you really want. But I'm also sort of taking a stance to have a deep relationship will involve being uncomfortable. It's not easy, and that's okay. It's okay. Because I used to say, oh, dating shouldn't be a job, and, it shouldn't be work, and
should be easy. Yeah. Should be easy.
Right. It should be easy. I'm like, it's not easy. It's not easy for me.
Yeah, I want to say one thing in response to this. I think there's sort of two elements. Maybe there's three as I think about hearing you. First of all, I want to say thank you. You've clearly given this a lot of thought, and I can tell you've done a lot of writing around it, because writing will clarify your thinking in a way that talking about things won't. And it's why I'm doing more and more writing about this topic. Hint, hint. And I do recognize that relationships are a lot of work, and that they aren't going to naturally be easy. I mean, they are for some people. There's some, there are some people who do truly find a soulmate, and they're like, everything kind of clicks, and they love spending all of their time together. And yes, they have some bumps, but by and large, they're just way better off. But there's sort of that messy middle of folks who are, they want it, it's rewarding, but it isn't easy in any way. And I don't think that the lack of ease should keep someone away from a relationship, whether it be a traditional one, a relationship escalator, or a sexual friendship, or, any sort of complexities that may exist with unconventional relationships, as you mentioned, solo poly, consensual non-monogamy, et cetera, et cetera. But there is something that we don't, I think, talk enough about, and that is like how profoundly damaging a relationship can be if you're not careful, if you're unlucky, right? That is, they can be abusive. And even when they're not, the heartbreak associated, even something like infidelity and the heartbreak associated with these things, I think are true risks. And obviously divorce is the biggest thing in some ways, right? The destruction that goes along with a divorce, whether it be wealth, an extended familial network and so on. And so I just think that like having, and I sense that you have this, and I think the QuirkyAlones probably have this, they recognize the messiness, complications, and challenges, and sometimes profound ones. And sometimes that may lead someone to not want to settle, that more balanced approach.
Well, you mean not want to settle, not want to get involved, or what do you mean?
Well, or just some natural kind of, reluctance is not the right word, but sort of the way that people approach relationships is, maybe it is a little bit tentative. Maybe it's, slow to hire, quick to fire. You know what I mean? It's not this blind rush into love that is just going to be seen as good and solve problems, because those first 6 weeks, boy, are they fun. Mm-hmm. I don't know.
Yeah, it's always a risk. I mean, for sure, it's getting involved with anyone is a risk. I mean, I just got my heart broken. I mean, it's painful, and I don't know. It raises a lot of questions for sure. But
the issue I say this, and I don't mean to interrupt, but the issue I say this is because the thing is, so I'm a behavioral economist, right? And so one of the classic choices in behavioral economics is a sure win versus a gamble with some probability of a bigger win or some probability of a loss, right? And so if you translate that idea into relationships, the sure win is the single life in which you're doing it well. The sure thing. And then the gamble is that it may pay off and be great, and it may not, right? There's more uncertainty around
but I think
the relationship.
If you have a deep yearning for a healthy, loving partnership, then I'm not sure it's a sure win to not engage in that kind of risk. Then, to me, and
it'd be sure but small is the idea. It's sure but small.
Yeah, maybe just a little bit flatter, a little bit. It's kind of, I mean, the way that I see it is that there's a variety of experiences in life. And, some people will get married when they're young and they'll stay married the whole time. And their whole experience of life will be with a partner.
Yes.
And, someone like me and a lot more people now, most people are going to have experiences of being single and in being with a partner. And
then maybe being single and then being with a partner,
right.
like, bouncing back between the two.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. Back and forth. And everybody is different about how they feel about that. And that depends on where they are in life too. Yeah. It's a sure win for you if it's a yearning that you can let go of, if it's not like a deep need to have that experience of partnership with someone, then it would be a sure win.
Yeah, I don't want to get too. It's an imperfect analogy, so I recognize that because there's things that are going on, right? Like the sure thing for some people is negative. You know what I mean? That is that as a single person, they're unhappy, they don't do it well, and so on. And then the gamble, so to speak, the gamble depends on the nature of that other person. So it's really a decision between this sure thing now and a gamble that changes depending on who the person is. And forgive me, listeners, for turning into an academic on you.
Or you could just be really good at being single for 10 years and then just get really bored with it.
It's true. It could happen. And then, as we've said, it's really not even as simple as what I've just described, because now there's so many other alternatives that sit in between being single and the relationship escalator. And
right.
And as you said, some of those things do a really good job of meeting your needs, including being freaky alone, evidently.
Everybody needs to have their
a little freaky alone time.
Freaky alone.
Before we continue, I want to tell you about our sponsor, Wax Crescent, a Boulder-based company that makes small batch candles, hand-poured. Founded by Kim Terabeel, a solo entrepreneur and contributor to the podcast, her candles are made with soy wax and infused with wonderful fragrances and essential oils. The candles are fabulously designed, and I use one nearly every day. Use code SOLO20 for 20% off your first order at waxcrescent.com. That's SOLO20 at waxcrescent, like crescent the moon.com. And gentlemen, don't worry. Kim has guy-friendly candles too, or as I like to call them, mandals. My favorites are Imagine and Birch. Thank you, Wax Crescent, and thank you, Kim, for sponsoring the podcast. Let me ask you about the who. Who is the QuirkyAlone? You have QuirkyAlones who are part of your movement around the world. My sense is that they tend to be women. Maybe overwhelmingly women. And I know this because in the book, I think you ask a question, can a man be QuirkyAlone?
Mm-hmm. So men can be QuirkyAlone. It's absolutely possible. I've met men QuirkyAlones. I've coached them. I've had them come to retreats, the whole gamut. I've met them live and in the flesh. And I've done a number of surveys, and it's always been consistent that it's 85% women who are answering the survey. And the other thing is that pretty soon is looking likely that this woman, Erin, who's been a major QuirkyAlone supporter and does a radio show every year on QuirkyAlone Day, which we haven't talked about, on KALX, she and I are collaborating, and we're going to start a QuirkyAlone community that she's going to kind of head up. So we'll have, by the time this podcast airs, people can check out that and see if it's live. And that will give a new view of who are these people, because it will be, now we're 2021, who's getting attracted to QuirkyAlone now?
Yes. What is QuirkyAlone Day?
February 14th.
Of course it is. That's great. This will certainly have aired before then, I promise that.
Oh, right. It's March, yeah.
I mean, it won't be March that it comes out. But in any case, now are you going to start a QuirkyAlone club on Clubhouse?
I haven't joined Clubhouse yet, but I might. We'll see.
Okay, you should.
I should. I know it's
you should snag it so someone doesn't squat on it at the very least.
Okay. I'll get on there tonight.
All right. I wouldn't be surprised. Actually, it would be a really great place for that community. I'm sure you have community members who are already on Clubhouse here. So that's very exciting. I mean, that's something that have been working on with Solo since the very beginning. And I have these solo clubs on Clubhouse. I also have a solo Slack channel. It's small right now, but we just crossed over 100 people on it. And, these are people all over the world, all different ages, all different experiences. Some never married, some divorced, some widowed, but all are looking to live a remarkable life during their single time on the planet. And so I think we can, at some point, we should have a joint party with the solos and QuirkyAlones. They would get along great, I think.
Definitely.
So let's talk about where this has led to. So you said you do life coaching, but you've also been exploring this more deeply with your new book project, and I'm eager to hear a little bit more about this trip. So just what has happened since then? I mean, it has changed your life, right? This idea has knocked your life onto a different path.
QuirkyAlone, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, right, definitely. So I've been working on this memoir for a long time, and it's a very deep kind of story that got revealed in the writing. So I had a year writing 700 words for the QuirkyAlone essay, which at least I can say worked out and had an impact. And I've been working on this memoir since 2012. So, wow, that's a long time.
700 words a year. That's like 50 years from now, this thing's coming out.
I know. I'm pretty sure that someone's going to go into my computer after I've died and publish it posthumously.
Right.
We got to think positive. It's getting out there.
I also already know your password. All one word, all lowercase.
Quirky?
QuirkyAlone, right?
QuirkyAlone, right. So this book is the story of actually how QuirkyAlone pushed me out of the life that I had constructed, because I actually developed a very bitter and negative attitude with QuirkyAlone for a while.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's really interesting to talk about this publicly in preparation for when this book will be released, because I want to make sure that my listeners, readers, don't feel like I'm dissing them in any way. But it was very different to be the leader of the QuirkyAlone movement versus just, anybody who identifies with it. Mm-hmm. Because I just felt overly identified with it. And, anytime I would go on a date in San Francisco, the guy would Google me.
I know this feeling.
And ask me about QuirkyAlone.
I know this feeling.
What the fuck? Can't we just go on a date and not talk about how being single is so great? It just felt very at cross purposes, in addition to all the other challenges of dating in San Francisco at that time. So basically, and when I was in my mid-30s, I kind of gave up on myself in a way, because I felt like I had to be practical and get a better paid job in Silicon Valley. And so basically I hit a breaking point where after I went to Brazil on a trip for 3 weeks, I decided that my future was in Brazil and that I was going to leave everything behind, and I was going to find love and everything else, all of happiness and sensuality and a different kind of life in Rio de Janeiro. And so I did actually do that. And I didn't find everything that I wanted. Surprise, surprise. And what happened was that I spent more time in Colombia, more time in Argentina. I discovered tango. I had a lot of sensual experiences, relationship experiences, but a lot of shame came up again and again, and a lot of my same patterns with men came up again and again. So it was sort of a story of, I'm going to go away to find happiness. But
how Sasha got her groove back. Right?
It's a little bit like that. I was trying to get my groove back, but then there is a pretty serious undertone to all of this story that through the writing, years into the writing, actually, I understood that a lot of my problems in relationship came from an incident of trauma that happened when I was 6, which was sexual in nature. Oh. And so it was something that I never talked about, and since then I've shared this with many different people, and I've come to understand that many people, women and men, have these incidents that they never share with anyone, and that these things can have a really deep impact on us in terms of the ability to trust, being very important in relationship, and the way we feel about ourselves. And so basically, the story starts off with thinking that it's going to be a direct line to happiness through, finding a great Brazilian guy. But actually, it's through awakening my sexuality and having all these experiences that I started to understand this, and that my body said things to me that I wasn't willing to say out loud, especially through tango. and a stint of orgasmic meditation at One Taste, which is this whole other thing, which is where I became a coach, actually.
I see.
So it's, it's this kind of layered story of healing. And it's also me grappling with QuirkyAlone because, I felt in the end, I came to realize that I had done a lot of people-pleasing things with men, and I had done people-pleasing things with my audience, of feeling like I couldn't be myself. And so at the end, it's, I still am single at the end of this book. So it's sort of a step forward from Sex and the City and Eat, Pray, Love, in the sense that the book ends with me being single. I hope I'm not giving a total spoiler out to people before they read it. But that I have a different relationship with myself and other people. And basically, I think that I'm lovable. I mean, it's a book about a woman who really doubts that she's lovable, even though she's the queen of self-love with QuirkyAlone, and goes on all of these experiences and does all of these things to finally understand that she is.
So as an aside, first of all, I'm very sorry to hear about that incident, but glad that you've been, at least you've been addressing it, right? These, the idea that something could happen at that stage in life and years later still affect you is really upsetting. And so to be able to work it through, I think, is really wonderful. To do that work. I had Kristen Newman on. Kristen Newman has a book, What I Was Doing While You Were Breeding. And it's a little, Stella Got Her Groove back-esque. She's traveling and men and romance and so on. That at the end of that book, she gets together and ends up having a family. And I was sort of like, damn it.
I read that book and I really enjoyed it. But I noticed at the end, she said, I only felt permission to publish this book because I had already met my husband. And I totally related to that because I can't tell you how many times in writing this book I thought, are people going to think I'm a slut? And there's actually not that much sex in the book for a book that's called Wet. But I thought that was really interesting at the end of her book that she wrote that, because it's sort of like, oh yeah, now I can be honest about those single slutty days because I already got my man.
Yeah, she's delightful.
But I love the book. It was great.
Yeah. You're delightful too. I really appreciate how thoughtful you are about all of this. Do you have any favorite QuirkyAlones?
Right.
Even just one? Like, is there one QuirkyAlone that you can point out and someone goes, oh yeah, I know that. I know that character. I know that person.
I mean, I think in some way the strongest QuirkyAlone example in our culture is Oprah. Because even though she has Stedman, she's such an individual, and her whole career has been about self-love, really.
Indeed.
Ultimately.
Oh, it's a great one. Yeah. All you have to say is Oprah, and it's just obvious. Yeah, that's great. One last thing, and that is, I have a note from our previous failed conversation about wholeness versus happiness. Can you end with that idea? Because I thought that I really liked that idea, and it's something that I have been working through with the language of solo that I think is important.
So this has come about because Erin and I are talking about starting up this community, and I wanted to have a definition of QuirkyAlone that was sort of refreshed for 2021, and one that I feel comfortable with, because I can only promote something if I feel in alignment with it. And I have this really elaborate definition. Obviously, if I spent a year on the essay, I also spent a long time crafting the QuirkyAlone definition years ago. So I wanted to take a fresh look at that and see if it still worked or if there was some way to update it. And one of the changes that we made was about changing happiness to wholeness. That, that QuirkyAlone, one of the things that really pissed me off when I was doing all that media about being QuirkyAlone in my mid-30s, and everyone was constantly asking me about it, was this idea of being a happy single was just really bothering me, because in my sort of fear state then, when I was so worried about never finding anyone, because I thought I was telling the universe I was a happy single, so okay, I'm always going to be single. So there was that aspect, but also nobody is happy all the time. I mean, this is sort of ridiculous. And it's in our culture as such a strong...
Yeah, it's part of the Declaration of Independence.
Yeah, right. So it goes back obviously centuries, millennia, the search for happiness, and that's okay. But what we have all kinds of emotional states in our life, and life is a roller coaster. We feel all kinds of things, and to me there's just a taut feeling with trying to be this happy single person. And it just felt sort of false and unrealistic, and not like a goal that I wanted to set up for myself even. But the idea of being whole was something that I could relate to and feel good about. It almost seems logical. Like, of course, we want to be whole as individuals, because we want to be able to stand on our own 2 feet and navigate life, whether we're in a relationship or not. And that felt good to me. And also with this journey of healing that I've been on and writing about, for me, it has a deep resonance of owning all the aspects of ourselves, that even the ones that can be shameful or difficult or, not so shiny, let's say. The shadow, like they talk about. So I think it's very powerful to aim for wholeness like that.
I agree. I think it's well said. I think, especially to the degree that happiness is connected to pleasure and positive emotion, you can be happy and incomplete in that way. That you're missing out on huge swaths of life that are really important and that lead to growth, but they just happen to be difficult, painful, either lacking positive emotion or even creating. I think about this, like if you want to climb a mountain and you want to experience the awe at the top of that mountain, that's going to be a painful affair. Like climbing a mountain is not pleasurable at all. Give it a try and try to make it pleasurable.
I've stopped many times.
And so, if you want to climb another mountain, or if you want to develop a new skill, or if you want to do something meaningful in life, you have to often forgo the pleasantness of a lot of things. You might, and so I like this idea of wholeness in the sense that you get to be complete in some way, and it leads to a different set of pursuits, I think. And it also suggests that there are multiple ways that one can become whole, as a single person. But I do like this a lot. I've been time and time again, this idea that for somehow this partnered relationship is the standard. And so now you are incomplete, you're less than until you can achieve it. I think is just, as I said, I use the word tragedy to describe it. I think it's tragic that people spend lots of their life feeling unwhole, incomplete. And then at times they might actually, as you say, settle for a less than desirable situation just to be able to check that box and to get the approval of others.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sasha, this was really fun.
It was really fun. Yeah,
it really was fun.
We got up the mountain. We got there.
We did it. I look forward to the publication of your new book. I look forward to the next QuirkyAlone Day. I look forward to learning and seeing your community come together. I think that's very exciting.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on. I think it's really cool. I also love your formulation about a remarkable life, single now, forever or for now. I think what you're doing is great.
That's very nice of you. Cheers.
Thank you for listening to Solo, the single person's guide to a remarkable life. For more about our guests and show notes, go to petermcgraw.org. Please subscribe and share with your single friends.